Hello, FRC Teams, and welcome to the first Fundraising Toolkit, Section 7 webinar, focused on the topic of grant writing, best practices, and tips. My name is Renee Becker, and I'm the first Fundraising Toolkit Coordinator. And joining me for this webinar is Kiri Kalik, the Team Grants Coordinator from FIRST, and Danielle Poliska, the Manager of General Accounting from FIRST. Ladies, thank you for being on the call today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here.
So the first fundraising toolkit started with a grant from the Argosy T Foundation, and the focus was to provide teams with materials to help them fundraise out in their local communities, help them develop local relationships with potential sponsors and with organizations in their area, and to highlight successful fundraising methods that teams are already implementing out in the community to help increase the sustainability of teams. Section 7 specifically focuses on alternative methods of fundraising through crowdfunding sites and grant writing. And today we're focusing on the tips for finding and applying for grants, and we'll be going over some common questions that teams have had and some best practices that teams can follow concerning grant writing. So, Kiri and Danielle, can you give us a little bit more background information about what you do?
Sure, this is Kiri. I have been in the development department at FIRST for about a year now, and my main role is helping sponsors and teams be able to allocate and find funding for the season.
And I'm Danielle Poliska. I'm the Manager of General Accounting here at FIRST, and I have worked in the finance department for 3 years now, and one of my primary responsibilities is to work closely with development on grants and team grants. So we're hoping that we will have some good information for you today.
All right, thank you so much. So to start off, I wanted to ask, where can teams find grant opportunities via FIRST or the FIRST website?
So one of the things that I've really worked on in the year that I've been here is helping to make our web pages more useful to teams. We've had a FRC grants page for a while, and we've worked on adding some tips and posting about any opportunities that we found specifically on that page for FRC teams. And additionally, this year we've worked on creating a Team Grants fact page. This page actually has information for all programs, all four, Junior FLL, FLL, FTC, and FRC, on grant opportunities or common questions that we receive from teams. So it's a really great resource.
And the final resource that we would strongly recommend is reaching out to your local FIRST representative. That representative is a great source of knowledge, information, and connections, so we'd really encourage that. And
could you repeat that last bit? I think we cut out for a second.
Okay. So the final place that teams can go to find grant opportunities is with their local FIRST representative, and we would really encourage teams to reach out to their local representative because they're a great source of knowledge, information, and connections, and they can help you find out more about grant opportunities.
So taking a look at this versus where could teams find local grant opportunities versus finding them on the FIRST website?
So there are a lot of great websites that have a lot of different information on grants and different avenues that teams can apply for funding. These two are two of the really good ones that we recommend utilizing, the STEMfinity site and GuideStar, and they list kind of different avenues you can look at, different foundations that provide grants to STEM focus, or you can really search for grants in a variety of topics. FIRST teams tend to utilize youth development, STEM focus, robotics, community development, and endless more. So really the possibilities are endless.
And we'd also recommend that teams use their mentor or their parents as a source to find grant opportunities. A lot of organizations might be willing to sponsor a team, as well as the mentors organization might be willing to sponsor a team. We've also seen a lot of success with teams going around to their local organizations and fundraising or looking for grant opportunities that way. So there can also be a lot of success using that venue.
I know that when some of the teams I worked with went out to the communities and did their community analysis or went to contact sponsors, they were able to find some local grant opportunities through their bank and also through some of the companies I contacted as well. So I think these are great examples for teams to start off with. Mm-hmm. All right, so how can teams find out if they're actually eligible for a grant? What suggestions do you have?
Well, the biggest suggestion is to make sure that when you're applying for grants that you read all of the requirements beforehand. That each grant has a different requirement of things that you should do or not do. For example, one of our sponsors that comes through our headquarters office requires that teams do not pay their registration fees before they receive official notice of the grant with instructions for the season. And I know there were at least 4 or 5 teams this year that missed out on that grant opportunity because they had already paid the registration fees and didn't pay close enough attention to all of those requirements. So really make sure to read all the fine print and you're following those instructions carefully.
And it might all seem a little bit obvious, but we'd also recommend that if you're unsure of whether you're eligible or not, to always ask. There's always a missed opportunity if you don't ask the question. Your local first representative could be a good source. If it's a headquarter-related grant, someone here could be a good source. So if you're confused about your eligibility, take the opportunity to ask. And finally, there's a lot of information on the Team Grants website, and opportunities for large grants are often posted there. So use those resources as well on the first web page to see if you're eligible for any grants.
Excellent. And when a team identifies if they're eligible, what kind of information should they have on hand when applying for these grants that would be useful to them?
Well, each grant does, require a little bit of different information. Each grantor is very different, but some of the common ones that we see asked are team status, whether or not you're a rookie or a veteran. A lot of grant opportunities depend on whether or not you're in one of these status. And the grant amounts tend to change based on whether or not you're a rookie team or a veteran. And that's not true for all grants, but it's a general practice. Additionally, if your grant is coming through to our headquarters office, to make sure to include your team number. That's how we identify you here, and that's how we know where the funding should be allocated. And so the team number is also how funders know where to allocate the funding as well.
Another really critical piece of information that teams should know or have on hand is their federal employee identification number. You'll hear a lot of people refer to this as an EIN number. Particularly if you are applying for a local grant, your school or local nonprofit should have a federal ID number on something that is called a W-9 form, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But this piece of information is particularly important to entities, and it has a lot to do with IRS reporting and things like that. But you just want to make sure that you have a valid current W-9 form, and this should not be a social security number. It's an identification number for an entity, which should be your school or local nonprofit. And a final common piece of information that might be asked for when applying for a grant is a grant budget for the team and how that team may use some of that funding and what they anticipate their needs are for the season.
And here we have a picture of the...
I would just also...
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say to add to the school or local nonprofit that there are a lot of nonprofits like 4-H's or Boys and Girls Clubs, things like that that are in the area that are typically able to help out teams if they don't have a school accessible to find that federal employer identification number.
Yeah, and Carrie makes a good point because not all teams are associated with a school. So if you are a homeschool team or something else, that local nonprofit like a 4-H club or a Boys and Girls Club or something like that is going to be a great source for you to obtain local funding.
Excellent. And the picture here is of an FTC sample budget, which can be found on the FTC website under Starting a Team. And there also are a few example budgets for some FRC and FTC teams under the first few sections of the Fundraising Toolkit. So I'd encourage teams to take a look at those if they don't have their own budget put together yet. All right, so if a team does receive a grant through FIRST, how can they send a thank you letter to that sponsor through the FIRST program?
Well, it's very important to send, your appreciation to your sponsor. It's how, they're going to know that you're really utilizing the funding and appreciate it, and, to tell your story. They want to know about what they're using their funding for to make sure that it is going to a good source. So we typically have teams send their any pictures or thank you letters via our development department at FIRST headquarters, and you can see the address there. It's 200 Bedford Street in Manchester, New Hampshire. And we make sure to forward those thank you letters to sponsors, whether it be in a report form or just by sending it directly to them immediately. So we make sure that they get all of that information.
That's excellent, and I think that's good feedback, since as part of the Fundraising Toolkit, we've really been highlighting how teams should follow up and thank their sponsors, and so giving them this opportunity, even though the funding goes through FIRST and the grants may go through FIRST, they can still thank those sponsors and get those contacts.
Absolutely, and I didn't add it on there, but they can also email it to all of our, each program has a grants box, so it would be frcgrants@usfirst.org or ftcgrants@usfirst.org, etc. So you can also email those items if that's easier.
Wonderful. All right, and I wanted to have the teams take away some, top tips that they should really keep in mind when they apply for grants. And so do you want to start off with the first few tips that we have?
Sure. So one of our first tips is that teams should keep in mind that local grants should always be processed through local channels. So that means if you are applying for a grant locally, you should use your own taxpayer identification number. You wouldn't want to use FIRST identification number. Think of it like a social security number. It's unique to each organization. So if you're applying for a local grant, there should be a local entity that's willing to accept the funding on your behalf, whether it's your school, a separate 501c3, or something like a 4-H or a girls club or boys club. The second thing that we'd like you to take away is that most national grants require a W-9 form, and we touched on that a little bit earlier, but just as a refresher, W-9 is a request for taxpayer identification. It showcases what type of entity you are, and most entities or grants will require this information to validate that an entity is who they say they are, and also for reporting purposes to the IRS. So grants may require you to provide it, and FIRST also would require you to provide it if you're in a position to receive a re-grant for a national grant that you've obtained. So just keep in mind that that form is particularly important, and you always want to have one that is signed by the appropriate personnel and completed and recent.
All right, and moving along, the last few tips.
So we've actually seen a few teams that have sent in applications and they didn't receive any confirmation that it had been received, and we hadn't actually received it, whether it, fax didn't work or various entities. So one of the most important things to do is to remember to check to make sure your application has been received. Materials available. And with that being said, sometimes the different grants, they require the application materials to be sent to other entities. So always make sure to know where to send it to as well. We've also seen a couple of grant applications come through with just, their spelling errors or various things like that that just make it kind of difficult to really that we have. So always to make sure that, all of your grammar and punctuation is always correct. These may be going to the actual sponsor depending on the grant. And finally, it does take a lot of time for us to go through all of these applications, whether it be us or the sponsors, to just, be patient. It's definitely, we won't not inform you of, the grant status once we do have it. So it does take quite a bit of time, sometimes depending on the grant, to get the confirmation. So just be patient and feel free to check in, but just know that it will take a little while.
Excellent. And I do think what you mentioned before, confirming that the application has been received and making sure that all materials have been submitted and that they're in the correct places with the right people is a really important tip for teams to make sure that they have their ducks in a row, so to speak. So, all right. Okay. Well, I wanted to thank both of you for coming on this webinar. And if teams have any questions, they can feel free to email me at rbecker@usfirst.org. Or, as we mentioned before, if there are any specific questions, the grants teams can be reached for the different programs. At what address was that, Kiri?
So it would be for FRC teams, it's frcgrants@usfirst.org. Or for FTC, it would be ftcgrants@usfirst.org, and the same for junior FLL or FLL. So
excellent. Well, thank you
happy
so
to
much.
answer any questions.
Yep. Thank you for coming on the call. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to be here.